Hey everyone, Karl Bainbridge back once again for another UFC post-fight recap, where for the second time since lockdown we were back in front of a live crowd. Houston, Texas played host to UFC 262, while Charles Oliveira took on Michael Chandler in a bid to crown themselves the new UFC lightweight champion. Let's get to the fights. And of course we start with our main event where Charles Oliveira defeated Michael Chandler by second round knockout to become the second Brazilian to win the UFC lightweight title since Rafael dos Anjos. Now, if you watched the preview show I did with Luke last week, I mentioned I had some concerns over how Charles was going to handle Chandler's forward pressure. We've seen him in the past struggle with guys who put the pace on him, and there were times in that first round that was very evident. Now, Chandler hits like a tank, there's no question about that. And especially in those early rounds, if he does connect with you, he can cause you problems. And we saw that pretty much from the first real exchange they had. Chandler connected with a strong left hand, and Charles almost immediately shot for the takedown. Chandler actually did very well. He nearly caught him in a guillotine, and I thought that fight could have very well been over in, the first minute or so. I thought from that point on, we were going to see Charles in his real domain. We know how good of a grappler he is. I thought a little bit of time on top, take away some of that explosiveness that Chandler has, it would give him a better chance if the fight went late on. I actually thought if Chandler had a better opportunity to win this fight, it was going to be in rounds 4 or 5. But we saw Chandler reverse position. He landed some decent elbows, some decent ground and pound, and Oliveira's face was, people forget this, his face was a mess by the end of that first round. When the fight returned to the feet, he then dropped Oliveira again, and I've seen a lot of referees, thankfully Dan Mergliata's not one of them, but I've seen a lot of referees stop the fight in that position. Personally, I thought that Charles was doing enough to keep himself in the fight, so thankfully the fight continued. But all the momentum at that point was going with Michael Chandler. I actually think two of the judges' scorecards, and I know it doesn't mean much with how Texas State Athletic Commission is, but two of those scorecards had that as a 10-8 round, and the other was 10-9 for Chandler, so all the momentum was going with him. Then the second round starts. Quick hook from Oliveira, Chandler's wobbled, and the fight's done. Now, I mentioned in the previous show, Oliveira's upturn has coincided with his striking fundamentals getting a lot better. It gives him an avenue to trouble fighters enough to set up grappling exchanges, set up his takedowns, but I never put forward the possibility of him stopping Chandler with strikes. Now, Joe Rogan made a big point in the opening segment about Oliveira's precision as a striker. That finishing exchange was an example of that. It was the chisel beating the sledgehammer. I have to say, judging from the attitudes I've seen online, the fans seem a lot more positive about Charles winning this fight than, in my opinion, they would have done with Chandler. Now, part of that's maybe to do with Chandler being a former Bellator guy. He has sort of an enemy stigma that sometimes come with that. We've seen it with like Ben Askren, Cyborg, even a lot of the Strikeforce guys that came over, they got pushed back for it as well. But more than anything, it's people resonating with Charles. He was a guy who spent pretty much his entire adulthood competing in the UFC. Clawed away on the prelims, he suffered setbacks, he had to fill with a featherweight, and he's finally starting to put it all together. And also, I think he endeared himself as well in his post-fight interview. Thought he came across well, and so did Chandler for the record. I think he came across very humble as well, even though he just lost a fight. This to me felt like a win for the hardcore fans, like the people who followed him on these shows and finally breaking through to the mainstream when he beat Tony Ferguson. It felt like a victory for those type of fans. The one thing I will say though is Dana White's body language when Charles came up to him, because obviously Charles jumped the fence, he went over to Dana White to celebrate. I'm not really a body language expert by any means, but I got the impression Dana wasn't happy with this result. I think they built a lot of long-term plans around Chandler winning. I mean, you could even argue that booking this fight in the first place was leaning towards Chandler, with Charles sort of being the longer, less comfortable striker, and we all saw what Chandler did to someone similar in Dan Hooker. Big overhand right, finished the fight. That, of course, didn't happen. I've seen Dana practically giddy at times when a fight result goes his way, and there wasn't anything like this with Charles. Now, from Dana's perspective, a big trash talker who enjoys playing the heel, it's going to be a bigger sell than Charles, whose English isn't really the best, traditionally isn't that sort of one-punch knockout artist. So this, to me, is a win for the fans, not the businessmen. The big mission for Charles now, though, is legitimising his reign. Whoever won this fight was going to have this air of paper champion around them. No fault of their own. It's just they never beat Khabib. You've got Dustin Poirier and Conor McGregor both waiting in the wings. Even though I love Charles winning this fight, and I love the heart he showed to get back into the match, there was little to make me rethink this sort of status of him as a paper champion. He's still, for me, a very beatable fighter, and if I put him against Dustin or Conor tomorrow, I would favour both over him. His job now is to prove people wrong, and the fact he's gotten this belt in the first place, he's shown he's more than capable of doing that. So congratulations to Charles Oliveira. The big mission starts now. Prove those people wrong and make yourself a legitimate champion who's worthy of holding that belt. Time for us to talk about the rest of the card, and this is a conversation I didn't want to have. Now, I love Beneil Dariush, and his comeback after what happened against Alex Hernandez has been one of the sort of feel-good stories of the past 2 or 3 years. But I knew him winning this fight was going to spark questions about Tony Ferguson. I mentioned this again in the preview show. Sometimes a fighter has that match that takes so much out of them, they're never the same. And that to me is what's happened when Tony Ferguson fought Justin Gaethje. That was his Dillashaw vs. Barao moment. Another 30-27, another performance where he was on the back foot for the majority of the fight, and another one where he got controlled on the ground. Now, to his credit, it was a better performance from Tony than he had against Charles. He tried being more active off his back. He went for Darce chokes and guillotines when Beneil shot in, but it wasn't enough. I fought this back at the Oliveira fight, and last night confirmed it. Tony Ferguson, as much as we love him, as much as I personally love him and enjoyed his sort of like 12-fight winning streak, he should have fought for the belt. He isn't a title challenger anymore. I can still see him having fun fights. It's not going to be a Tyron Woodley situation. I think him versus someone like Paul Felder could still produce a lot of action. But at 37, he's not going to be fighting for the title anymore. It don't take anything away from Beneil. I think part of the reason Tony couldn't do anything off his back was work Beneil did grappling. I mean, the guy's won multiple no-gi championships. He's very heavy on top. And the reason he's been building the streak is because he's falling back on his grappling a lot more. Now, though, he's in the shark tank. Can I see him beating a Gaethje or a Chandler or a Conor? I'm not sold. But the fact we're having these conversations after what happened against Hernandez is something in itself. It's a fantastic career turnaround for Beneil Dariush. And I think a lot of people need to appreciate that a lot more than they have done. The focus of the story has been, understandably, Tony Ferguson's decline, when it should be just as much about the rise in performance of Beneil. As for the rest of the card, Burgos versus Barboza, everything we expected. Now, the speed Edson throws those kicks is unlike anything you can have in this level. And early on, I thought we were going to get a Dan Hooker situation. But Burgos recovered, his body work is up there with some of the best. I personally thought he won the second round and had momentum going into the third before that knockdown. Like, Shane has a lot going for him technically, but he's very hittable, and that's going to be his downfall every single fight he's going to have until he starts working out those kinks. I was concerned about the delay in the knockdown. I hope there's no underlying health issue which caused that. As for Barboza, he's starting to find his feet at 145. It sort of reminds me a lot of Jose Aldo. Like, Aldo went to bantamweight, he didn't seem all that comfortable for his first few matches, and then around the sort of the time of the Chito Vera fight, you realised, hey, this guy is finally fighting like a bantamweight. And he's going to be that sort of wily gatekeeper that's going to keep a lot of the young guns in that division on their toes. And Barboza could very well be that guy. I think his style's maybe a bit too ingrained to be like a title challenger or anything, but he's a dangerous out because of the way he fights. If you're going to want to prove yourself at featherweight, going through Edson Barboza is a big, big ask. Other notes from the card, I think we probably had the closest thing to an entertaining Caitlin Chookagian fight. Personally, I scored for Viviani. I didn't expect the kind of performance we saw from Jordan Wright either. I sort of wrote him off because of his connections to Explode, which I've mentioned in many videos before, but great performance to beat Jamie Pickett very, very quickly. I do have issues with the crowd though. If Jacksonville showed us the good things that come with fighting in front of a crowd, Houston showcased the negatives. The wooing, the USA chants, fighting between themselves. I think the treatment they gave Matt Schnell and Bontarine for what was a serviceable fight was especially harsh. Well, that's our recap for UFC 262. Please like, share, subscribe, post a comment. It all goes towards helping the algorithm with YouTube, which, if you follow the main channel, I have plenty of problems with. I'll be back next weekend as we go back to the UFC Apex for Rob Font versus Cody Garbrandt. If you love your boxing, you are going to love that fight. This is the INC. Thank you for watching.